Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Today's topic on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is about conflict management on the farm. Are you holding issues back from conflict? Does every issue ever discussed at the family meeting turn into a shouting match? Do people storm out? Are there core issues leading to the constant conflict that you're experiencing? This is exactly what we'll unpack today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Now, it's easy to spot conflict. It's easy to participate in it, even fuel it. But what about resolving conflict? What about having constructive conflict? Now that's the awesome sauce that today's guest will describe. Today's guest on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is Kelly Dobson of LeaderShift. He's based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and he consults industry and farm leaders across this country on leadership-related issues. I hope you enjoy my conversation on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast with Kelly Dobson. Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. Shaun, how are you?
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to talking about today's topic of conflict management and where leadership kind of fits into this. And leadership is definitely one of your big passions. I think, Kelly, conflict is a big issue when it comes to managing the farm. We've got a family dynamic, got generational differences. We've got a lot of issues that can be really super stressful at different points in the year. When we talk about conflict and dealing with that and having good conflict management on the farm, how big of an issue is this, do you think, in farm management?
That's an interesting subject. I think the word conflict is probably the stuff we hear about, which is the people who are openly arguing. I would say it's this way. I would say from what I've experienced and even how we measure it, the bigger concern for me is that there isn't sufficient discussion about the things that matter most. And so what we see oftentimes when we're working with leaders, we'll see people who will measure very high in something called passivity. And believe it or not, so like things that we would talk about as being conflict. So people who are arrogant, rude, autocratic, controlling, highly critical, those are all strongly negative correlated behaviors to leader effectiveness. But actually the one behavior, passivity, it's a full 10 points more negative than those. And that's what the research says. And I'll say, when my experience on the farms, I am more concerned about the farms who are holding issues that they simply won't speak about because they are so concerned about everybody getting along and that there be no conflict, and that and they just they have no appetite for it. And I think there's as much or more risk in that than the notion that we ever hear about the big time conflict that goes on farms. Those are the ones we hear about, right?
That's interesting. So there is conflict on the farm because it's a family business. Families sure. like to battle about certain things, especially it applies to generational differences or the direction the farm's going and stuff like that. But I never really thought about, okay, so it's not about the level of conflict, but the question is, when we have conflict, is it about the right things? Like, are we we think we're sort of figuring stuff out and we're having conflict, trying to come to the right conclusion, but we're not even talking about the right issue. That's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So that's a lot to unpack. So, I'll do my best to try and unpack that as the way that we try and explain it, because so much of what we do, or what I try to do through LeaderShift, is helping people put this in a box in a way that they can understand, so that they can actually see it when it's happening and then go, this is not going the direction we want. And how can I show up in that conversation, whether I'm the boss or not? How can I show up in a way that's going to drive this forward? So for example, So to move this out of a conflict stance and move this into a leadership stance, the first thing I want to say is that we should always be driving towards and strengthening partnership. In partnership, like I said, in this last was this idea where everybody feels responsible for whatever we're doing together. Now, the way we get to partnership is that we start with something called interpersonal clarity. And this is foundational. So interpersonal clarity, simply put, is you understand where I'm coming from. I understand where you're coming from, and we know the differences between the two of them. Now, that doesn't happen at like a bolt of lightning in one conversation, particularly the more challenging the conversations like farm transition. You can take several types of these engagements where we begin to understand each other. And what we know, what the research says, is that for most situations, or if you want to call them conflict on the farm, if we can get to a conversation where we get to interpersonal clarity, 4 out of 5 of those problems solve themselves without any kind of like directive problem solving, any kind of mediate, like dare I say the word mediation, because people just figure out what's going on. And dare I say that the biggest problem, the biggest source of conflict in the farm is that people are really suffering from a real insufficient level of partnership, and the consequences can be conflict. It can be low productivity. It can just be mistakes, you name it. And what we know, what this is really all about. So if it's not interpersonal clarity, you said, so what's really going on? If you want to put it all into one big deal, there's this thing we call interpersonal mush. And interpersonal mush is when I go around and I make stories up about the world around me and what your intentions are, and then I act on them as if they're actual fact. Oh, yes. And I don't check them out. Now that sounds super simple, but when we unpackage how we create our experience, and there's like the objective, observable world, like what I heard and what I saw, and then there's all the stories that I make up about what's happening, and so on and so forth. We click them together, and that creates our experience. But if we're not very self-aware and we're under a lot of stress and the world is moving fast, we don't know what's part I made up and what part is real. And we operate on that, and the next thing you know, we're stepping on toes and we make judgments about other people. And so to get a sense of how profoundly this can be, think of the observable world, like in other words, what I heard and what I saw as tiles on a floor. Okay. And the way our mind works is to connect all those tiles together so we can make sense of them. We use grout. And that grout is actually our sense making. Those are our perceptions, is our past experiences, our judgments, the way we think the world works. And when we connect those together, that creates that story. But if it's really, really good, they're mostly based on our observable facts of the world. And we check them out. But what in agriculture and what's going on in the world is that most people's floors, most farm families' floors are more grout than tile. That's where all the trouble starts.
I'm thinking
enter LeaderShift.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of family succession, right? Just as an example, where you avoid the topic because you know it could lead to conflict. So people ignore it, don't talk about it. That's a passivity. and then we have the issue of the interpersonal mush, where that is like so prevalent. Like, I'll tell you, that actually explains a lot. Just those two phrases on what is happening very, very frequently in family businesses.
Well, it's part of the human condition. It's a way it's a winning actual design. I mean, it's helped us. It's a good thing in the sense that, so everybody thinks like this idea of sense making, make up stories is a bad thing. It's actually not. It allows us to make decisions and judgments on imperfect information, right? It allows us to learn and guess and predict. The problem is that when we're talking about more complex issues and we're talking about human intent and we're looking for partnership, we operate on guesses, which we know our brain is, as we talked last time, our core operating system, it's bias negative, right? It's 5G negative, dial-up positive. Most of the time when we're guessing about people's intentions, about what we really think they mean or what they say or what they want most, it's seldom, if ever, biased positive or even neutral for that matter. And that's a big part, because that feeds into this. That's why it's so important that we constantly, in every engagement, we strive to have our experience fully communicated so people can understand us and they feel like they can describe theirs to us, and we can just work that out in everyday interactions.
Now, all personalities view conflict differently. So you may think we're talking, but I think we're fighting. That plays a role in this dynamic too.
I think you're talking about my farm.
I was talking about mine, so sorry.
No, absolutely true. Like there are different types of temperaments who are tolerant to different levels, and let's face it, different cultures have different levels of the way they interact with one another. And this is a part where not being situationally aware of like what are people's tolerances in terms of how we're speaking, and not being aware that if how I'm showing up is actually having a negative. So that's one of the things we talk about in descriptive selves, is that we really want people to clearly be able to know, how can I most likely share my experience to the other person in a way that it's likely to be understood, that minimizes the chance for reactivity, so it doesn't light them on fire and just make them upset, and that it invites the person to be curious and invites interpersonal clarity, and allows to clean up in real time any of the excessive sense making that's going on about what I think they're really trying to say, that we afford space for that to be cleaned up as we go forward. And if we could all do that, we wouldn't, there'd be all manner of potential
Now
going on farms.
We're not trying to avoid conflict, because I remember I read Patrick Lencioni's Death by Meeting, and sure. he talked about good meetings have conflict. And in that story, he talked about this company was having these meetings, and the trouble was nobody ever conflicted with each other. It was just all sort of like, that's good. Yep, that sounds good to me. And nobody questioned anything. Nobody brought up counterpoints. So conflict is not all bad. There's positive conflict as well, right?
I think so. I think and again, this is the death of words and what people read into them. For the people who really don't like any sense of conflict, I think it's about, can we confront for insight? Can I bring up something that's important to me and bring it forward in a way that isn't going to turn into an argument, or really is going to make literally at a neuroscience level, is not going to make the other person reactive. And that's the part. Some people can be in conflict and not be reactive, which is this emotional charging to the point where I get so excited and and what's going on inside me, I'm not under control of that. In other words, my nervous system has me instead of me having control of it. Because it's going to take care of you. Auto steer, fight, flight, freeze, turtle response that we have to manage for that. And if people get reactive, the first thing happens is they stop listening, and that's different for different people. So the goal is really not about conflict. The goal is whether or not we can have an exchange where real important things get talked about in a way where, again, to driving towards interpersonal clarity. Because if we can get to there, then the next thing you know, people will partner. Yeah. And they'll take responsibility because they know their roles, and they can hear gently about how what they're doing and how they're showing up is actually having a negative impact, intentionally or unintentionally. That's actually that's part of a pattern of what's going on in the farm that is either a lot better. And they can see that, and they're invited to be hearing about how other people view me showing up in that. Or they're just not sure why. Like, tell me why you thought like that. Like, tell me your thinking about how you got to this point. Because we've had this. We do this all the time in the small. So, for example, we had a young employee. They dumped what just now replacement cost $10,000 welderator off a front end loader because they picked it from the bottom and not from the top. So we had a bit of debrief about. So let's just talk about what happened. Objectively, what your reflections are on that, what do we know might be the right way, and going forward, what we might want to do about that. Now, that could have been a disciplinary action. That could have been all kinds of conflict. That could have been a bunch of uncomfortable stuff. And instead it was handled completely differently, because at the end of the day, nothing is going to stop that thing from having a whole bunch of bent corners. That's not changeable. But what we can do is we can just move forward from here, and let's see if we can't not have that happen again.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor. This episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. When it comes to your operation, a business plan can help you reach your goals. It's your roadmap to success. Be equipped to face the challenges of modern-day farming head on and come out on top. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and speak with an agriculture account manager near you. It's really about having a discussion, trying to sort out your issues. We can call it conflict, but it's avoiding, I think, what you just described, that button pushing, where you've moved confrontation to like provoking. And like you said, we've all been in those discussions where when you do that, you've lost your audience. You're not making your case anymore. The other person has really just shut you out, and there's no communication happening at all anymore. Yeah.
So maybe one way to look at this is when people say, well, I'm just speaking, and we see this all the time. People go, well, we're going to clear the air. and we're going to have one big Super Bowl of all the issues and what's not working, and then all the judgments and the full and clear opinions get hurled across. And what we know about that is that might seem like it's actually the clearing of the air, but what we know is that it more than often it bruises and limits people's willing to risk in the future, and really whether or not they're willing, and to a certain degree they're willing to partner. And so to flip the switch on this, so how do people start with this? I'll offer three things if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would ask people is, when they're talking about, because many people say, well, this sounds really complicated, or I don't know how to show up in this. And the first thing I would ask is, I'd really ask you three questions. The first one I would ask is, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the other person? Are you focusing on the situation and seeing it as a problem, as opposed to, let's say, an outcome to be achieved? So in other words, what context are you actually showing up in that space? And to that point about showing up, the next question I'd ask is, so how are you relating to other people in these situations? Because how I relate, how I'm communicating with other people will absolutely drive it to conflict, and drive and move ourselves away from interpersonal clarity and partnership, or it's moving toward. And I think a lot of people really don't realize that in every encounter, we're either strengthening interpersonal clarity and driving for partnership, or we're not, and in fact making it worse. And I've seen where, really strong relationships can be put on, and everybody has this, there's this one thing that happens and it freezes that relationship for a period of time until that relationship can be reestablished. And that's a part about being really conscious about what I'm trying to do. And the last thing I would ask to that would be, what actions am I taking? In other words, it's one thing about, how I'm relating with other people, but am I doing something or what actions am I taking that are actually driving towards the thing that matters most to me? Because so often we'll see people who will be they don't realize that doing nothing, this idea of passivity and pleasing, that they say, well, it's better than fighting. And I'm like, well, is it? Because by the numbers, we know statistically, it's not driving towards passivity is like the anti-leadership score. That is a real challenge. Now, there's deep reasons why that exists, but the question is, doing nothing is not an answer. There has to be there are better ways of showing up. So the question is, if it's not that, then what? And then ask, so what small little step could you take that would move you closer in that direction? Not some whopping big fix, but what about yourself could you work on that would invite that type of a different behavior, a shift, if we could call it that would have you step into that kind of situation differently.
Does it matter? Is there a change in the impact if it's spontaneous versus intentional?
Tell me more about that. Say just a bit more.
So we've all been involved in where it's like you're having a discussion with a business partner, maybe it's a customer, or it's just a friend, and you're talking about something. All of a sudden it's like, you start to hash things back and forth, and all of a sudden it's like, you know what, you're right. You know what, we need to do that. Versus we're going to have a meeting tomorrow at noon and we're going to sort out this issue. So is it spontaneous versus intentional? It doesn't really matter.
It's a neat way. I haven't heard it said like that. I'll put it this way, and this goes back to my comment the last time we met about how leadership can't be outsourced. I think under some of these most challenging types of engagements, most people think that if they book the appointment and they show up at the lawyer's office or the accountant's office, that it's going to just get in one fell swoop, and that none of this that the level of partnership that currently exists does not going to impact how far we're going to get in that meeting. So that's it. Now, again, if we have technical questions, we absolutely need those people there. But to I think directly answer your question, the kind of spontaneous, what we call learning conversations, or not only that, we call organizational learning, where people just put their heads together, they're sharing their experiences in real time, you say going back and forth. And what the amazing part, and this is the highest order of what we call organizational effectiveness, where suddenly when you add 1 + 1 + 1, suddenly something that nobody actually understood before surfaces. So in other words, only everybody had a part of the puzzle and nobody could figure it out, but you put the pieces together and suddenly it's like, or what you're saying is this? And you're like, well, I wasn't, but now that you mention it, if we put that together, that means it's really that and not that. And everybody just sits there and they go, holy smokes. And you're like, and all of a sudden, and that's learning. That's the drop of gold that comes out of the bottom when we can do this at the highest level. And that's what we all want to strive to.
And there also is that part, one thing we haven't talked about yet is, the talking versus listening, right? Because in conflict, when there is a conflict and it's constructive conflict, trying to hash out what the best strategy is going forward, making that decision that has felt so elusive, listening to the different perspectives will help yourself just as much as you blabbering on and on about what your perspective is.
Well, there's lots of cliched statements about listening, and they're all true. I will say this: when I talked about improving our observational of what's going on, in other words, what I see and what I hear. So much of the problem is that people think they can multitask and do something well, and I'm bad for it. My wife continually reminds me, and it's one of the most. I think it's the most thing that actually hurts partnership. And hurts interpersonal clarity the most is that people just simply won't just stop what they're doing, put their phone down, and just square up and just sit back and not have to problem solve. And this is the part when this is a trainable thing to just the idea of stop. I'm not here to solve their problems for them. I'm not to come up with some quick answer to get to the end of their problem or even guess what their problem is to come up with an answer. And so many people who are high controllers think that that's the skill they bring to the world, is their quick mind, their problem solving ability, and going, most people just need a thinking partner so that they can talk through their experience. And you just sit there quietly. Like that's what the act of coaching is simply just acting and listening and then reflecting back. So what you're saying is, or did I hear you right when I said, and going, or just even in just listening and then going, wow, like that sounds like that's really heavy for you. Or that, it sounds like that's quite a, and going, so, what might you think, what are you thinking you might do next? And this is the shift between being a victim or being a rescuer, like I'm here to solve people's problems, or just going, you've screwed up and this is the shift of mind, moving from that of a coach, right? Or a challenger where we say, you know what, I'm hearing what you say, and you know what, I think you're up to it. And I think it's up to you to figure this out. I mean, I'm here to support you, but I'm not here to solve your problem. Because invariably you'll see on the farm where people will just come and they'll throw up their hands like, I'm done. I washed my hands. I can't, whatever. And you're like, oh, hold on a second. We've seen this, or you're training younger people. It's like, well, you do this, or maybe in farm transition, it's like, well, maybe you handle the books, or you handle the heavy decision about whether or not we're going to buy or sell or market, or we're going to work on this tax strategy. And people are like, oh, they want to back off because it's heavy, right? And they don't have all the answers. And it's like, and that's a part of moving people forward going, I get that that's rough. And it's like, so what might be one thing you could do to actually get a little closer to figuring out what to do next? In other words, you don't have a solution, but what's the next thing you could do? And then they just sit there and look at you like, you're not going to tell me? And I'm like, well, I could, but there'd be no learning. So he's like, well, have you talked to Bob? Yeah. Have you talked to Bob, or have you talked to Susan? Well, and then they're like, well, just see if she has some time. It's like, well, I don't want to feel, in other words, I don't want to acknowledge that I don't have this all figured out. And I'm like, hey, just not for nothing, but I think everybody kind of knows you don't. Like, and it's okay because nobody expects you to. You think you do, but nobody expects you to. But they would really love to help you. Like, give it a whirl. Just let me know how that turns out for you. I'll check back. And they feel this like, I'm here, but I'm not taking over because that doesn't move this business forward. And the squirm on that to the point where they, nobody comes to me on my farm like that anymore because they know they're just going to get turned around. Right. But they come and go, look, I got this problem. This is what I've tried. You got anything for me? And I'm like, actually I do. Yeah. How about this? Go try. Okay. Yeah. So, and that's awesome because then that means that, they're leaning in, and I'm not here to solve I'm not would you call it Napoleon? I'm not here where, I'm how to tell people how to put their pants on in the morning because that's just gets old quick. So not scalable.
Kelly, I want to finish up with this. Before we started recording this, we were kind of talking about this topic, and you put out a phrase that I want you to address: confrontation without conflict. That seems like a key piece here on this topic. I like that, especially with so many people thinking about conflict as this negative thing. Confrontation is a little bit different.
Yeah. Confrontation is about inviting a conversation about something that really matters to you and asking that person to help you figure out a little bit better. And then there's a story I'm making up in my head about this that actually, that I'm not sure that's verging on a bad intention or a good intention. And I just want you, to help me figure this out. and being open to what they might share with you, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not, and we can practice how to do that. Being open to that kind of an engagement on the farm, step by step in the small, and then ever moving to ever deeper subjects, including all the way up to business transition. That's the path forward, as far as I'm concerned.
Kelly, thanks a lot for joining us here today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Great stuff, and I really appreciate your contribution to this topic.
Thanks, Shaun.
If we can get to the point where we find that interpersonal clarity and find true partnership, we're making serious headway to using conflict to solve problems and not destroy farm businesses. Family business is hard. We all know that. There's going to be conflict, but you need to find leadership mechanisms to make it constructive and not destructive. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback or comments, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com or call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank for their sponsorship. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.